love without attachment, give without expectation. You didn't come here by accident. Perhaps a part of you is quietly searching for peace. If that's true, subscribe to Buddha Pray and stay with this video until the very end, because here, every day, we share stories that speak not to the mind, but to the soul. Let me ask you something. What would you do if you gave everything you had to someone who never asked for it, and one day they left without a word of thanks? Would you feel betrayed, used, broken, or would you smile and simply say, giving was already enough? This is the story of Margaret, a woman who raised a child that wasn't her own. She gave her whole life and received nothing in return, no title, no gratitude, no place in that child's history. But still, she said, I loved him, and that love didn't need anything back. Now tell me, was she foolish or was she free? Her name was Margaret. She lived in a worn-out little cottage on the edge of a quiet village surrounded by dusty hills. No husband, no children, no family, just Margaret and silence. One stormy evening, 18 years ago, she opened a door and found a newborn child, wrapped in an old towel left in a basket. No note, no name, just soft crying and helpless eyes. The villagers said, it must be someone's mistake, someone's shame. They warned her, don't get involved. It's not your burden. But Margaret gently picked up the baby, held him close to her chest and whispered, you are not a mistake, you are a beginning. She named him Lucas, and from that day she became his whole world. To raise him, Margaret worked in the fields, cleaned houses, and collected empty bottles to sell. She wore the same shoes for 10 years so Lucas could wear new ones to school. She often skipped meals, but Lucas always had enough. She never bought anything for herself, but every birthday he had a gift. People asked her, why sacrifice for a child that's not yours? She simply smiled and said, love doesn't need proof of blood. It only needs presence. When Lucas turned 18, he was accepted into medical school. The entire village celebrated. But then a woman appeared, elegant, wealthy, dressed in expensive clothes. She introduced herself as Lucas's biological mother. She told him, I was young, I had no choice, but now I've built a new life. You deserve a better future. Come with me. Let me give you what Margaret never could. Lucas was torn, but eventually he left. No goodbye, no explanation, just silence. That night, Margaret sat on her wooden bed, holding a wool scarf she had spent weeks knitting, a birthday gift she never got to give. She didn't cry. She didn't beg. She just folded the scarf and whispered, I loved you without asking for anything back. And I'll keep loving you, even from far away. Years passed. Margaret grew older, lonelier, weaker. And then the illness came. The hospital diagnosed her with terminal cancer. She had 3 months left. One afternoon, as she lay in bed, a figure appeared at the door. It was Lucas, now a young doctor, wearing a white coat, but his eyes were filled with tears. He knelt beside her, held her hand, and whispered, I'm sorry. I didn't understand. I chased a life that looked better, but I left the one who gave me life. Margaret looked at him with the same calm smile and said, You didn't leave me, you just walked your path. But remember this, being born from someone's body doesn't mean they raised your soul. That is love. Lucas broke down and wept. The next day, Margaret passed away, peacefully. At her funeral, there were no expensive flowers, no speeches, no large crowd, just Lucas standing alone, holding the old wool scarf in his hands. It smelled like dust and memory and love that never asked for anything in return. In Buddhism, there is a powerful teaching about giving without expecting. It's called Dana Param, the perfection of generosity. But true generosity is not measured by how much we give. It's measured by how lightly we can let go of what we gave. In the Anguttara Nikaya, the Buddha said, "There is a kind of giving where one gives without desire for return. That giving is noble." Margaret lived this truth. She gave her life to Lucas with no strings, no expectations, not even the need to be called mother. She didn't love him because he would one day repay her. She loved him because her heart overflowed with compassion. But let's pause here. Is that foolishness or is that enlightenment? You see, in this world we are taught to protect our hearts, to only give to those who deserve it, to never love too deeply unless it's safe. But the Buddha taught something different. In the Dhammapada, he said, "Let go of attachment to people, to outcomes, and even to your good deeds. That is the way to peace." Margaret never clung to titles. She never demanded gratitude. She gave and she let go. And in doing so, she became free. On the other hand, Lucas's biological mother returned not out of love, but from desire, a desire to claim, a desire to be seen, a desire to replace. That is attachment. And in Buddhism, attachment is the root of all suffering. When we give love with expectation, we suffer if it's not returned. When we help someone and secretly hope they will praise us, we suffer when they forget. But when we love just to love, when we give just to give, then no one can take that peace from us. This is why Margaret never broke, even when Lucas left, even when the scarf stayed folded, even when she died without the title mother, because what she gave was already whole. Let me ask you, have you ever given something and felt hurt when it wasn't appreciated? Have you ever loved someone deeply and watched them walk away? If you could go back, would you still give? Would you still love? The Buddha says, "The wise man gives, knowing that merit flows not only to others, but cleanses the giver's own heart." So when Margaret gave, she didn't just raise a child, she cultivated her own awakening. Dear listener, if you've ever given your heart to someone and they walked away, if you've ever sacrificed in silence with no one to see, no one to thank you, no one to stay, then you already understand what Margaret felt. But here's the most beautiful part. She never needed them to stay. She never needed applause. She never needed her name written in someone's memory to know her love was real. Margaret gave and moved on. Not because she was numb, not because she was naive, but because she had something rare, something sacred, peace. And that peace came not from what she received, but from what she released. So I ask you now, who in your life have you loved but expected something in return? Who have you helped and quietly waited for them to thank you? What kindness did you offer that turned into bitterness when it was ignored? And more importantly, can you let that go? Can you love just to love? Can you give without needing to be remembered? Because that is the root of liberation. The Buddha once said, even the gift of a single kind word, when given without expectation, brings joy to the giver's heart. So imagine what giving your entire life could do to your soul. Margaret may have died without flowers, without fame, without recognition, but her legacy is written in something far deeper, in compassion, in silent merit, in a love that asked for nothing, but gave everything. Maybe you know someone like her. Maybe you are her. If you are, please don't ever feel like your love was wasted. Don't believe your story ends in sadness, because every quiet act of kindness, every small moment of sacrifice, every forgotten hug, every unspoken thank you was witnessed, maybe not by the world, but by the law of karma, by the universe, by the seeds you've planted. And one day, those seeds will bloom, even if you never get to see them. So today, if you've been hurt by those you helped, if you've been overlooked, forgotten, forgive them, not because they deserve it, but because your peace is worth more than your pride. Let it go, breathe, walk away in silence, but with your head held high. You loved, you gave, you were real. That is enough. If this story touched something in you, share it. Someone out there is breaking inside, and your share could be the hand that lifts them. And in the comments, tell us your story. Who have you loved without return? What did you give and never get back? Do you still believe it was worth it? Because when we share, we heal. And if you haven't yet, subscribe to Buddha Pray, because here we don't just tell stories, we water the seeds of awakening and remind one another that to love without attachment is not weakness, it's freedom.